RAP. Regional RAP, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, exploring the deep Great Barrier Reef, is my guest, Dr. Robert Beaman. Robin is a research fellow and marine geologist based at the James Cook University in Cairns. He has previously worked as a hydrographic surveyor with the Royal Australian Navy in the 1990s to develop nautical charts for mariners. Robin's current research focuses on the gain of knowledge and understanding of the long-term geological and physical processes that have influenced the shape of Australia's seabeds, and to study the relationship between deep seabed habitats and their associated marine life. He is a lead researcher on the 3D Great Barrier Reef project to develop high-resolution 3D depth models for the Great Barrier Reef and Coral Sea, now widely used for geological and seafloor habitat research, flood plume modelling, larvae tracking, and coral predator control efforts. Robin was the expedition leader aboard the Smith Ocean Institute research vessel Falkor in 2020, when it discovered a 500-metre mountain rising to within 40 metres of the surface during a survey of the northern reaches of the Great Barrier Reef. The peak of the yet-to-be-named detached reef is well populated with corals and teeming with marine life, and its discovery received worldwide attention. Welcome, Robin.
Hello, Bill. Very nice to be here.
Thank you. We waited to this day in particular because it is the second anniversary of the discovery of the detached reef. But if I could just start, if you could just give us a bit more information about yourself, your misspent childhood, maybe a little bit of time in the Navy, and how you moved from being just doing survey work to doing research work in JCU.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. Well, I grew up in Cairns. I'm a Cairns boy. I think my children are here. They're fifth generation Cairns people. So it's Cairns is very close to my heart. And as a child, I used to go out to the Great Barrier Reef on very old boats, as they were then, big wooden boats, the Hales vessels. They were some of the earliest tourist vessels that travelled out to the Green Island and the like. But even as a child, I was completely besotted with the colours and the coral and the fish. And I guess I've spent my whole life looking at the ocean and the reef. But as I became an adult, my late teens, I joined the Navy quite young. I was 17, and I ended up spending 20 years in the Navy, and worked on all kinds of vessels all around the world, from frigates to destroyers, supply ships, patrol boats, and gaining experience, and eventually became a seaman officer. Ended up, driving a lot of these larger ships. They took me to places all around the world, some tropical, subtropical, and I spent nearly 2 years overseas with the US Navy. So I got to see an awful lot of the world through that period. And it was probably in that sort of later phase in the 1990s where I specialized in hydrographic surveying. And by then I'd actually gone back to school and did a degree in marine biology and geology as a mature age student at James Cook University in Townsville. And that kind of led me into this specialization, which is hydrographic surveying. It's a profession to do nautical charting. In Australia, the Royal Australian Navy, the naval officers and sailors had the remit to do the nautical charting for Australia and surrounding waters. And so for the better part of about 10 years, I was on numerous hydrographic vessels working around the Australian region and Southeast Asia and in Pacific, doing nautical charting, building those charts for mariners, for the safety of navigation and environmental preventing environmental harm. I was based out of Cairns, my home, which was nice, and again I was developing those charts at about the time when modern computers were allowing us to do very detailed mapping, this three-dimensional mapping, using the sonar system called multi-beam sonar. Puts out multiple beams of sound, and you get this beautiful three-dimensional picture of the seafloor. And I was completely besotted with the ability to, I guess, almost like draining the ocean, to strip back the water and see that seafloor in 3D. That led me to this, I guess, this thirst for knowledge. What is down there and why is it there? But there's just a limit to what you can do in the Navy. And at that point, I left in 2000 and became an academic, and I've been mapping the seafloor ever since.
I think it's quite interesting. The Navy was responsible for doing a lot of the charts and the exploration for mariners. I remember I was in the Air Force in the 70s and that, and we still had a unit called the Central Photographic Unit that was still flying missions over Australia to actually get the land survey maps completely accurate in that. So the military has done a big job both on land and in the sea for the Australian public.
Yeah, for sure. And probably one of the most important environmental surveys that's ever been done on the Great Barrier Reef was done by the LADS unit, the LADS flight, which stands for Laser Airborne Depth Sounder. And it was developed down in Adelaide and eventually rolled out onto aircraft. And it's a series of laser beams that are shot down underneath the aircraft as it's flying, and it measures the depth of water. And probably about 80 to 90% of all the coral reefs on the Great Barrier Reef have been flown over by this LADS flight unit, building up that three-dimensional picture of the shape of the reefs. Now, the reason they were doing it was actually to find the edges of the reefs. Where is the danger zones so that you can keep the shipping away from it? Now, that program ran for nearly 30 years and only finished a few years ago. But it's a legacy that will live on, and it's probably it's just a huge cost to Australian taxpayers to run this program, but highly successful.
Just on another part there in regards to geology, marine geology. Now, I understand geologists on land, they can go a long climb over hills and pick across the ground and get their little hammers and tap things and have a good idea. But then, as Sheldon Cooper says in Big Bang Theory, geology isn't a real science, but we won't argue about that. But it must be somewhat more difficult to actually have a good understanding of geology undersea when you can't just jump out every 5 seconds and get your little hammer out and take a sample on that. So how does the geology part work into your operations?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yeah, it's far more difficult. For a start, you can't even see the seafloor unless you're in really shallow waters. If you go on Google Earth and have a look at the, what you see in that imagery, the depth of water in the clearest waters, you may be able to see down to about 30 meters, 40 meters in the absolute clearest waters. Beyond that, the only way to see the seafloor is to put cameras down, lowering cameras, which has all the problems of, ingress of water and pressure because there's huge amounts of pressure. Or you have to use sonar, and this is the beauty of this multi-beam sonar. It uses sound to develop the three-dimensional shape of the seafloor. On land, we use lasers, we can use satellite imagery. You can actually see the ground and the shape of the terrain and the trees and things on it. But doing it in the ocean is far more difficult. For a start, if you actually want to be out there and grab a piece of rock or a bit of mud, you basically have to go out in a ship. And I go out in large ships. Most of the ships I work on are about 100 meters long and they're very expensive to operate. A typical daily cost to run a ship of that size is about $100,000 to $130,000 a day. So most expeditions are multi-million-dollar operations. And we don't go out that often, perhaps once a year, but these are really serious undertakings. And everything is done, it's like a huge factory at the back of the ship. Cranes and wires and coring devices and rock dredges with chains, and everything's difficult. But for me, I love that kind of, the multi kind of operation aspect. And I guess this sort of comes from my Navy days. I just like big ships.
Hands-on.
Hands-on, it's a big team operation. Generally, if I go out as chief scientist, you're managing a science team. The science team can be up to 20 people from all, international scientists from all around the world, plus students. And then you're dealing with the ship's crew, and they are real experts in themselves. It's the people that drive the ship, in the bridge, and then you've got all the deck hands. People are operating, equipment in rough seas, spray, wind. You're having to deal with all of these things on a deck that's moving, and you're trying to sample a seafloor which may be kilometers deep. So it's an ordinary, very difficult place to do work in, but incredibly satisfying when it all comes together.
At this point, I just want to share a screen. As you were saying, it's a very expensive operation, and you've got to be thankful for the philanthropists who do put up funding and provide assistance. And the Smith Ocean Institute obviously is one of those institutes. But obviously getting time on their vessel would be also a bit of a task, because there'd be a lot of people bidding for that time. And I think at the moment it's now in the Mediterranean Sea. And this is the ship you were on.
Yes, let's talk about this. This is utterly unique. I guess the opportunities and voyage that came about, and we'll take up probably the rest of this discussion this morning. But going out in a ship, like I said, is expensive. And in Australia, we have only one large blue water research ship. It's the RV Investigator. And getting time on that is very hard. It is competitive, and I guess we've been fortunate to use that vessel, every few years. But what we're seeing now is philanthropy organisations, wealthy individuals who have committed their vessels, large vessels, to go and do marine science, and we're seeing more and more of this. So in 2020. The Schmidt Ocean Institute, which is owned by Wendy and Eric Schmidt, and Eric Schmidt was the CEO of Google. So quite wealthy individuals. Their philanthropy organization, the Schmidt Ocean Institute, has this vessel, the RV Falkor. It's about 80 meters long. It is a world-class research vessel. It works at sea nearly constantly, and it operates all around the world. But because it's a US-based organization, they tend to do most of their work in the United States exclusive economic zones. But in 2020, they decided to commit the Falkor for a whole year around Australia. And we were the beneficiaries of that. Australians were the beneficiaries of that. But it had been planned in 2019, right, pre-COVID. So there was a series of expeditions that were well worked out to work clockwise around Australia. They came into Sydney in very early 2020, and then they worked their way along the southern part of Australia, and they were over in Western Australia working with a big international team over there around about April when COVID struck. Now, they'd always planned to come over to the east coast of Australia because we actually had an expedition lined up with them in August. But in April, everything went crazy, as you can remember. In Western Australia, all the ports were shutting down. If you remember, the cruise ships were being banned. It was a real major panic, and Falkor got caught up in all of that. They were banned out of West Australian waters, and they were told basically head east. And so they came around the top of Australia. All prior expeditions were cancelled, and they just came around. They basically arrived in Cairns, just off where I am here, in about mid-April, to try and get an exemption to stay in Australia. There were a lot of us working hard behind the scenes, talking to politicians and health bureaucrats to try and keep this ship in Australia. The risk was that it would be banned, it would leave, and everyone would lose. Thankfully, we got that across the line, and then everyone had a collective sigh of relief, and then it was like, okay, what do we do now? At this point, the Schmidt Ocean Institute asked, would I like to help organise an expedition so the vessel can be at sea for a month and a half, because they had a full crew on board to go and do work out here in the Coral Sea. The proviso was that it had to be fully remote. No scientists could go on board because of the whole COVID issue. The ship had to remain its own little bubble, but we would manage it from ashore. So I'd never done this before. I would like to play a video of, I guess, how that all came about. So if it's okay, I'd like to share my screen.
Thank you.
We were Falkor's first fully remote science team.
None of the science team could actually be on board the ship.
This came about sort of in an interesting way because of COVID-19.
We had to figure out how to be able to communicate with the ship regularly.
But what really surprised me was, that actually turned into a real advantage, the fact that so many scientists around the world were in lockdown.
We went to the Queensland Plateau, a large plateau out in the Coral Sea Marine Park. It's one of the largest marine reserves on Earth. And so the aim of the expedition was, number one, to do a whole lot of multi-beam mapping to understand the very detailed shape of the seafloor.
The multi-beam maps are really a very, very crucial first step in understanding the geologic evolution of these systems. And this gives us more information about how ice sheets have behaved in the past, how stable or unstable they might be in the future in response to global warming.
Because of course in the ocean nothing happens in isolation. Everything is connected both horizontally and vertically. So now having this extra layer of knowledge is going to be incredibly useful for any future management.
Remote sensing technologies like multi-beam sonar, that's great in itself, but it's another thing to actually put a camera there, and especially something as good as the Sebastian, where I do feel like I'm there on the seafloor.
One of my favorite memories, my first dive, a big squid swam across the screen and I was like, oh, this is a good start. And we came upon this red blob and it was a sea cucumber. It flew up and used its tentacles to fly around and to swim away. It's just been exciting, and I've got no other work done during this time because I've spent my days glued to the screen and waiting to see what would come up next.
Probably one of the most standout for me is just the number of chambered nautilus that we've seen. I stop for nautilus. They say stop for rainbows, I stop for nautilus.
There were quite a few species that we didn't expect would occur here. So we call that range extensions, when we see something that we know occurs somewhere else, but we've never seen it here before.
The chats, that's been fascinating, right? Suddenly I'm out there with 100 experts.
For everybody, it was just a really interesting experience. I think it's something that really should be a model of how to do this type of science in the future.
Patrick, he's from Belgium, and he's a slit snail expert. Like, I don't even know what a slit snail is, but he's just said, you've just found the first slit snail in the Coral Sea. You know, he's over the moon.
There were things that I've never seen before. Geomorphic features, I have no clue what they are.
Good morning, everybody, and we are now live.
What is most appealing about your work at sea?
For me, it has to be the people, and being able to facilitate their endeavors to peel back what we don't know of the ocean floor is pretty rewarding.
Everything in the world that's alive is basically forms a tapestry that ultimately holds us. And I think it's important to think about that, because every time you lose something, you lose a thread out of the tapestry that ultimately supports us humans.
The research vessel Falkor was one of the few research ships in the world that were able to operate through this crisis. And I think the Schmidt Ocean Institute have set a very, very high bar. This is the bar we need to work towards in the future. I guess the big message there is that the science must continue.
Well, I think it's a lot more colourful than a moonwalk, the inner space.
Oh, it was amazing, Bill. So I mentioned Sebastian. That's the name of this huge ROV. It's about the size of a car, a large car, and it's 4,000 meters rated, which means it can go down 4 kilometers deep, and it's every dive we did was live streamed through YouTube and Facebook. So I had this amazing experience of actually being at home in lockdown, like everybody else, with my family, my kids. And I'm sitting there talking to a ship which was hundreds of kilometers away, just out in the Coral Sea, talking live to them. And I was able to see the video as it was coming up through a fiber optic cable. So that was then transmitted up through a satellite to me on land. I was able to see the video, talk to what was there. That would go back to the ship, as then mixed with the video, and then streamed out to the world with, maybe a few seconds delay. So it was just astounding to be there and seeing this marine life. I felt like I was under the water. It was beautiful vision. And, the fact that we'd mapped the seafloor beforehand, we knew exactly where we were going. So it wasn't nothing's trivial when you're putting, this machine over the side. It's a multi-million-dollar remote operated vehicle. So the name we gave is called Sebastian. And as we got more and more clever with it, we were able to bring in other scientists. So they were able to bring in, we were able to connect with scientists from different parts of Australia and the world. At the same time, we had those chats running. So we would have those scientists overseas who were locked down and just watching it in real time, to give us their expertise. So I was learning at the same time. It was an amazing experience. That was the first month and a half, just working out in the Coral Seas. But I was at home, but mentally I was on board. It was a really incredible experience.
It's nothing like the comfort at home while working, eh?
Well, I was able to go down the shop and grab a coffee because there was a few cafes still open. So, but they were huge days. I always said, if we're going to do this remote thing, I didn't want to be a passenger, right? I don't want to be some passive person involved. Now, I guess the beauty of the Falkor is it's a Google ship. They have this incredible satellite communications going on. So we were able to be in touch with them regularly. Like, we'd have daily video meetings, and we would plan out the day. We'd have plan A, B, and C, contingencies if the weather got bad. I mean, it was all the usual things that happen when you're a chief scientist. It's just that I was trying to do it on land. And then, of course, all the ROV, the underwater work, I was speaking for that, and those dives are 7 hours long. So they were very, very long days. It's relentless. What I didn't know was that was the first of 8 back-to-back voyages.
I suppose the thing is, because everyone's listening to you, you've got to be on top of your game.
Yeah, that's right. And it's the first time I'd ever I'd been involved with cameras in the deep sea. So I guess that was the point I made, when I guess sent you a bit of a, an idea what this talk would be about. Prior to the Falkor, parts of the Coral Sea and the Deep Great Barrier Reef are actually quite well mapped. And then there were other parts that were very poorly understood. Like, for instance, out in the Coral Sea around these 30 large atolls, we're talking Osprey Reef, Flinders Reefs, that people may be familiar with these reefs. Some of these reefs are in the top 20 largest atolls in the world. So Lihou Reef and Diamond Islets, Tragos Reefs, they're over 100 kilometers long. These are very, very large atolls. And they're part of the Coral Sea Marine Park, which lies directly adjacent to the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park. So biologists like Danielle Cacciarelli, who was in that video, she's done a lot of scuba diving and fish fish censuses. It's in scuba diving depth. So we actually had a fair idea of what's living in that sort of 20 to 30 meter range and shallower, but nothing deeper than that. And the same goes for the Great Barrier Reef. Most coral reef scientists, they spend their lives on coral reefs. They probably only dive down to 20 meters tops. But the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park extends much further offshore. The deepest part of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park is 3.6 kilometers deep. Now, we know that depth because we've mapped it with sonar, but we've never put a camera down there. And in fact, cameras have hardly ever gone below about 100 meters, about the deepest shallow water ROVs, something about the size of a suitcase that you can put off the back of a boat. So our knowledge of the deep Great Barrier Reef extended to maybe around 100 meters. I'm talking about the marine life. So Falkor coming along and giving us this amazing tool where we could put it down kilometers deep and spend a whole day there and move it around. It even had arms, so we could collect things. We could pick things up. It was astounding. So we have the
Did you
maps.
A permit for that?
Of course.
Well, you won't be able to go into a public park soon and kick a rock. So lucky you did it now.
Well, true. Yeah. I mean, that was a very, doing science in the Great Barrier Reef is not easy. You have to have a research permit. We were lucky, when this Falkor turned up, at least, 6 months earlier than expected, that all of these officials, like from the Marine Park Authority and Parks Australia, like everyone pulled the stops out to try and get these permits sorted because we could not collect anything without a permit. Big job, but we had all of that. What it meant was, as we got in the groove of things and we brought more scientists on board, particularly the biologists, we were able to get them involved with collecting things. So initially we had a sponge expert from the Queensland Museum, Merrick Eakins. And then we had Tom Bridge, who's the curator of corals in the museum in Townsville. So they were involved from the get-go. And as we got kind of better and better, we started bringing more and more scientists in. So we got more marine geologists, Jodie Webster, who was in that talk, that video, and and so it just grew. Now, this is highly unusual, right? When you go out to sea on a vessel, you start with a team, and you hope you don't lose anyone. You come back with the same team. But in this case, because it was remote, we just kept building and building and building. So we brought in fish taxonomists, shark experts, black coral experts. So by the time, I guess, when the Falkor finally left Australia, and it had done, 8 or so expeditions, there was well over 100 scientists, both national and international, who were involved. Some of them ended up being on board. Most of them weren't. We had quite a lot of students that join us as part of this. It was an amazing experience because it just kept growing and growing. And the ability to sort of bring in experts as you need them was wonderful.
So when did you actually get chance to put your foot on the Falkor?
It was the next voyage. It was around about August. So at that point, state borders had not shut. You know, when I look back, that was a great time. There was still travel across borders. From around September, everything closed and it got very difficult. But for August, we managed to get a big team from Geoscience Australia, mainly based in Canberra. They all flew up to Cairns and we did 2 expeditions back to back. So I'm going to play you, I'm going to share my screen again and play you a YouTube video of that voyage.
So this has been very much a voyage of discovery through part of Australia's marine estate which we didn't know a lot about.
So for the last 30 days, we've been out here exploring the deep Great Barrier Reef and the Coral Sea. The vision, the animals, plants, the sediments, the geology, all of that has been revealed now.
Which is just amazing when you think about, you know, that there's no light in most of the environments that we visited, but we've got this amazing record of what's there now.
Without a doubt. Yeah, this is the deepest ROV dives that have ever been done on the Great Barrier Reef.
We now know the visual context, as well as all the data, the depth, the location, the temperature, the salinity of the water. All of that is what we've been able to get precisely for each sample that we've collected with ROV Sebastian. That's just way above and beyond what other methods can give us.
What it tells us is that the deep houses high biodiversity. Specifically, which species live in these habitats and how far do the ranges extend was a question that we were able to answer by collecting the different corals and sponges on this expedition.
For me, some of the fascinating part of this voyage has been looking at the planktonic story.
Right, so what we've just done is inserted GoPros into Dr. Dougal Lindsay's stereo GoPro housing. He's collecting a lot of mid-water column data on a lot of the gelatinous life. He couldn't make it because of COVID, but you're welcome, Dougal. They're all on there, and we'll see what we get.
So the information and data and samples we've collected will now be disseminated through our networks of collaborators.
Data is going to be openly available. It's going to fuel a hell of a lot of new research, looking at the deeper environment.
This work matters because if we don't know it's there, we can't manage it. The RV Falkor is giving us the tools to better manage the Great Barrier Reef.
The reason why we're collecting biology on this expedition, and the reason why it's so important to have physical records of all the corals and sponges that live in this area, is because biodiversity information underpins every conservation decision that we make.
So it's really reaching back into time through the mapping and the sampling that we've done to really start to unravel in a bit more detail the reason these reefs are here and how they've responded to climate change over the long geological cycles. And that gives us really important baseline information for understanding how these systems might behave into the future.
Yeah, it's been a real joy to actually be on board the Falkor.
We're working really, really hard, but we're having a lot of fun. And for me, that's the memory that you'll take home and remember long after the voyage is finished.
So yeah, that was the second voyage, big team of people, and that again, we were able to put the cameras down into those parts of the Great Barrier Reef, nearly 2 kilometres deep, just off the ribbon reefs.
I just think it's interesting in regards to some of the comments there in regards to we didn't know what was there before, we know what's there now, so we can manage it. Well, to me, as a lay person, it was managing itself quite well before you turned up. And what do you think you're going to do to actually manage it? I mean, it's not as though you can actually change that environment. It's just a natural environment that's been around for a long time. I don't know how we suddenly think we can manage it. And I don't like humans managing things that they don't know much about.
Yeah, very good point there, Bill. And so I guess when you look at the Great Barrier Reef, it's a collection of habitats, and the coral reefs get most of the focus, and rightly so, because that's where, you know, the tourism is, and, you know, fishing occurs around it, and the like. That deeper part is, as you say, it's untouched, but it definitely helps to understand what's down there. And I don't want to get too much involved in the, you know, how the management implications of it. But what I am curious about, and this comes back to, I guess, that curiosity that I have, that innate curiosity, is what is down there and why is it there, and then what is living there. But just
I think what it is a record. You've got a record now, and you can refer back to it as a baseline for the future, but not actually interfere with it.
Ideally, yes, that's right. But, you know, when you're talking about, I guess, here's a real simple one. You know, there's fishing, commercial fishing on the Great Barrier Reef. There is deep water fishing, and by understanding better the science and the environment around where those fish occur, the habitats that they live in, you can help manage where those impacts may or may be better placed. So I guess from the Marine Park Authority's perspective, that's how they look at things. But certainly there are habitats that are far more importance to humans. And, you know, you can think of seagrass beds and mangroves to stabilize shorelines. But, you know, there's also the deep lagoon, which is where most of the shipping traffic goes. I mean, there's a huge amount of traffic that's moving up and down through the Great Barrier Reef every day, and then the coral reefs themselves. And so when we talk about that deeper part of the Great Barrier Reef, you know, there are very few people out there. Certainly, when we were operating it, there are very few people, but it's still part of that marine park, and we just didn't know anything about it, other than perhaps the shape of the seafloor from what we'd mapped. So now you actually go down there and we realize that it isn't this benign desert. It's actually, there's an awful lot of marine life down there. It's just not what you expect. I mean, like going out into the far off, you know, out in the Coral Sea, we saw a lot of nautilus. On nearly every dive, we saw nautilus. Now, they are worldwide a kind of a rare, they're rare. In fact, they're commercially harvested in Southeast Asian countries, and they're, you know, highly endangered because the people catch them. You know, they basically catch them in traps. We always knew that there were nautilus out of Osprey Reef, because there'd been a fairly big program that had been running there for many years. But we had no idea that there were nautilus just everywhere. We're not talking, you know, gazillion numbers here, but, you know, to put a remote an ROV dive down in some random part of the edges of one of these atolls and see a nautilus, it was a huge surprise for us. So it's that kind of, I guess, opening up knowledge of the sea, of the marine life that's down there. Whether it needs managing, you're right. There's very few people out here, certainly in the Coral Sea Marine Park, that are fishing for nautilus. But as far as, I guess, understanding our marine estate, and Australia has one of the largest marine estates as a reserve in the world, like well over 30% of Australia's offshore areas is a marine park. It's, you know, if you want to manage it and understand it better, you have to be out there and doing what we were doing.
Okay, then if we can now move on to our Beaman's Blade Reef.
All right.
That's my favourite term for it anyway, but I don't think it's going to catch on. So maybe you can just talk about that naming process that's gone on since it was first found, and we'll talk about the expedition following that.
Yeah, okay. So probably this is why you originally reached out to me, Bill, and you mentioned it in the introduction. When we, I think it was the third voyage, it was around about September, October. Again, I was chief scientist, a very long voyage, it was about 45 days. By then, the ship had actually mobilised from Cairns to Brisbane, and it was operating out of Cairns. But all the state borders were shut, and so we're only able to bring Queensland researchers physically on board and students. But we still had this huge growing army of scientists, from remotely involved. Anyway, we set off. My goal was to map the offshore Cape York area. Now, Cape York, I can see it in the background there. It's a very remote and wild part of Australia. There's very few people live up there. There's Aboriginal communities, mining camps, cattle stations. But for the most part, it's extremely remote and wild. And on the ocean side, again, not many people go up there. Maybe the occasional adventure dive tourism vessels. There is quite a lot of merchant traffic, shipping traffic that are going up and down the two-way route there, guided by Reef pilots. But when you go that little bit further offshore, virtually no one goes there. And it's been the case for many years. Even from my Navy surveying days, the nautical charts up there, once you get off that shelf, were blank. There's just white. It's deep water, but we have no idea what the shape of that seafloor looks like or what's living there. We had it was like a real blank part of Australia. In fact, it's probably the most unmapped part of all the continental slope anywhere in Australia. And so my goal was to get the ship up there and systematically map it. This is where I put my Navy hydrographer's hat on and guide the ship to systematically map, going northward from around Princess Charlotte Bay, Cape Melville, Princess Charlotte Bay. And over that series, over a month, we mapped that slope. Now, it's a very difficult area to work in. It was steep. The edge of the reef is right there. It's like a knife edge, and then it drops down nearly 3 kilometers. And what we found was it was filled with canyons and old landslides and drowned reefs. And anyway, it was quite a remarkable landscape. Certainly the most remarkable landscape I've ever mapped in my entire life. And I've been doing this for a long time. But as we got up around the detached reefs, now these are really unusual reefs. There were 7 of them that we know of. One of them is Rain Island. It's the world's largest green turtle rookery. Very, very special part of the Great Barrier Reef. They call it the Galapagos of the Great Barrier Reef because so much marine life comes around this tall reef. This is Rain Island. There were 7 others, and they'd all been mapped in the late 1800s by surveyors, people like myself from 100 years earlier. But they were more interested in mapping the edges, again, for safety and navigation. And that's kind of where the picture's finished. But as we mapped with this fantastic multi-beam system, bringing up 3D picture of the seafloor, we were mapping in around 500-600 meters depth of water, and suddenly the seafloor came up like a pinnacle. And we knew that it was very, very tall because our sonar beams, which come out at an angle, weren't going over the top of it. So think of sonar a bit like a torch beam, and you're shining it at something, you'll see a shadow if it's going over, the light going over the top. The sonar beams were not going over the top of it. So we knew that it was very, very tall. How tall, we don't know. But we got the whole crew up there, the very professional team on board. We had forward-looking sonar, downward-looking sonar, and we very slowly drove over the top of this feature, hoping that we wouldn't run aground. We all had sweepstakes as to how deep it was going to get. I think I put down 38 meters, and one of the other, ship's captain put down 40 meters. Well, he won. It was the top of it was at 40 meters, so it rose up like a big blade, 500 meters tall. So it's now an eighth detached reef, and it looks very much like a seamount. I can actually share my screen and show it to you in a moment. But it's highly unusual. It's certainly very old. It's probably millions of years old, and the reason it's tall is because the seafloor has subsided over a long time, and all the growth is happening at the top where the coral reef is. So it's not growing from the bottom up, it's growing from the top down. And as the seafloor subsides over probably millions of years, a little bit of coral it's like putting imagine a tall building and you're just adding another story, another floor to that building. So as it drops, it becomes tall simply because it's trying to keep it within that photic zone where all the coral growth is happening. So the fact it's even there is just amazing. And like I say, it's probably millions of years old. So I'll just share my screen and we can have a look at it in 3D. All right, so this is a 3D model of that area that we mapped. I'll just zoom out and give you a full Great Barrier Reef picture. Just drag that down a bit. This is the 3D model that we've been developing for well over 10 years now with the help of the Navy, Geoscience Australia, and it's an extremely detailed picture of the seafloor. This is Brisbane down here. This is the Fraser Shelf, and you can see just offshore here, these are canyons and lots of landslides happening around Fraser Island. The colouring is completely artificial. All I've done is I've coloured it red for real shallow, 20, 30 meters, yellow, about 40 meters, and then blue all the way down to, that's about 3 kilometers deep here. So it's completely artificial color. But then there's hill shading, which gives it a little bit of shadows. And that way the human eye can see the bumps and the lumps. So this is the Capricorn Bunker Group off Gladstone. There's Gladstone in here. And this is Heron Island and the Capricorn Bunker Group. And the 3D model allows us to do all sorts of things. So we can do profiles across things, and we can generate contours on the fly. But there's all sorts of things preserved on the seafloor, like old river channels. This is the Fitzroy River, now under about 70 meters of water, but when sea levels were lower, it would have drained right across the shelf here. This is the Swain Reefs, a vast remote part of the Great Barrier Reef. And then as we head further north, the Whitsundays, where we have lots of tidal flow running between the islands and scouring the seafloor down to about 100 meters deep. So it's quite an interesting part of the Great Barrier Reef. And then these are all the reefs in the Central Great Barrier Reef, big extensive reefs. I mean, huge. These are tens of kilometers long. And then we get up to Townsville here. This is Magnetic Island, the Palm Island Group, Hitchinbrook Island. And you can see the reef just goes on and on. It's 2,500 kilometers long. And then when we get to Cairns, this is Cairns where we're talking right now. This is Green Island, Arlington Reef. And I guess what I want to draw your attention to now is this deep part of the reef that we're quite interested in. This is the edge of the continental shelf. The coral reefs stop here. And then we have the continental slope. And all of it is cut with these deep, deep canyons. These are over millions of years. Sediment and time has eroded the seafloor and left these canyons here. So this is the area that we were mapping and putting the cameras down in with the Sebastian. But what I wanted to show you was the work that we were doing as we headed farther north into the off Cape York Peninsula. So none of this is this sort of grey brown area that was mapped by the Falcor during September and October. All of this was this white and nautical charts. It's now 100% mapped. And, we did it with a small team of people in the Falcor. But this is the detached reefs area. This is Yule detached reef. Southern small detached, northern small detached. Had actually been mapped by the Navy Lads Unit only a year prior. So they'd mapped the top of it. But if they'd actually gone a few more kilometers further north, they would have found this. This blade is the new reef. It's 500 meters tall. The top of it is not very big. It's about 50 meters wide and about 300 meters long. It's about 40 meters. So this is why it's unusual. It's acting like a seamount. We put a camera down there and we spent the whole day bringing the ROV up the seafloor. It's like mountain climbing. And then we came over the top. It's like getting to the peak, and it was covered in fish and sharks. And it was really astounding. And of course, we live streamed it to the world. So this is the seafloor off Cape York Peninsula. And I'll just zoom out. And here's Cape York all the way up here. And this is the work that we did during COVID. Very, very busy. And, you know, it's just fantastic. But we have now proposed a name for it. It's not, I don't know, Beaman's knob or whatever, Rob's knob, whatever you said.
No,
before.
Blade. Beaman's Blade.
Beaman's Blade. We've actually proposed the name Falkor Reef in honor of the Falkor, the ship, because it was such a significant set of expeditions. Without the Falkor and the crew and all the science team, this would never have happened. But it was actually COVID that gave us this opportunity. Just talking about naming and proposals and things like that, it's not a simple exercise to go and name a reef, even though a lot of reefs on the Great Barrier Reef are unnamed. You'd be surprised. Perhaps at least a third of the reefs of the Great Barrier Reef are unnamed. Most of the reefs along here have no name. But that doesn't stop people from submitting a name. And every year, 1 or 2 reefs do get named. These are shallow reefs. But this was quite unusual, this one here, because no one even knew it existed. So it actually sits within Queensland coastal waters, which is a marine jurisdiction zone. And the Great Barrier Reef is managed both by the Queensland government and also the Marine Park Authority. And so when I put forward the proposal, Falkor Reef, it got a lot of people involved, a lot of government people. So it's now been a year. And there's been, about 2 weeks ago, a public consultation became live on the Department of Resources website. It's called Have Your Say. And anyone can go there and they can have their say. They can, you know, cast their opinion on whether this reef should be named Falkor Reef or give it some other name. But there's been a lot of consultation, including with the Indigenous groups in the area. There are some rules around naming features. Certainly, you know, you can't just name a reef after a living person. Generally, you know, reefs are named by people who are who've deceased, you know, prominent people who are involved with the reef. So there's some rules around it. But anyway, I think we'll find out in December what people's opinions are. And if no one has any real objections, it will become Falkor Reef. That will become official. It'll go into the government gazettes. It will be named Falkor Reef forever and a day on nautical charts. And, you know, I feel like I've played some small part in that.
Just in relation, let's get into the geology of that mount. Now, are they that mount, is that sort of like its base material or underlying material like granite or something like a basalt, a hard rock like we have on the continent?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, going into this area, because we had so little knowledge of what was down there, you know, we were trying to, I guess this is the joy of discovery. You're trying to use all your knowledge that you've built up over many years to try and understand, how does something like that exist? For a start, it is a coral reef. It is what we call, the whole thing is limestone. Now, we could see this when we put the cameras down at 500 meters down. There's hardly any light, but with our lights from the ROV, we could actually see the layers from the limestone. So we knew that it was a limestone coral reef. to get 500 meters deep means that it must have grown over millions of years, right? It predates the Great Barrier Reef itself. The Great Barrier Reef is probably around 500 to 600,000 years old at its earliest. That's when we get the first turn on of tropical corals growing. You know, when you put drill cores down through the reefs, and there's been a lot of coring done over, you know, many decades. When you drill down far enough, eventually you just hit, you know, non-coral, non-limestone. And so we know roughly the turn on of when the Great Barrier Reef happened. This Falkor Reef is much, much older than that. And the other 8, you know, the 8 detached reefs are certainly very, very old. They were probably growing during what's we call the Miocene, 2 or 3 million years ago, because what we found was lots of these drowned reefs, you know, ones that had really drowned, they weren't able to keep up with subsidence, and they're just bumps on the seafloor. We found hundreds of them. They're about 20, 30 meters high. The platform that it's on is actually a piece of the Australian continent. Now, we know that because we actually got a rock, and we're working with geologists here, hard rock geologists at James Cook University, and we think that it's probably Laura Basin rock, because the rock that we actually picked up had plant fossils in it, even though it was 2 kilometers down. So it would have once have been on, you know, up above what the seafloor, the sea is now. There were plants growing on it, and then we had a lot of sediment coming down, quartz and silts and muds, not marine. And then over time, with the breakup of Gondwana, you know, this large landmass, the breakup of Gondwana is, you know, Australia splitting from Antarctica and South America splitting away, and whole pieces of bits of Australia, the eastern side of Australia, were basically pulled out into what's now the Coral Sea and the Pacific Ocean. So as part of that stretching and pulling, the edge of the Australian continent broke and subsided. At that point, it was inundated with seawater, and it was warm tropical seawater. And these are when the coral reefs first started growing. And these detached reefs have been growing through that whole period, not drowning. And, you know, you could scuba dive in the top of them. This one, it's a deep dive, but you could scuba dive off it.
Of the other detached reefs, are they deeper or are some of them shallower than the latest one?
The bases of them are about the same. You know, they're all around that 500 to 600, about 500 meter average, just where that, you know, where that big ledge comes out. But the tops of them are really shallow. Like Rain Island is a coral cay. You know, it's covered in turtles and you know, seabirds and like, they nest on it. But I guess the fact that it's these reefs are isolated, they're away from the Great Barrier Reef, they're surrounded by oceanic waters, clean oceanic water, animals, migrating animals can move in and out freely. They don't have to go through narrow channels. Makes them highly attractive for these animals. I mean, this is why Rain Island is the world's largest green sea turtle rookery, just because of the geography is what drives it, why it's there. And the geology is what gives it that origin. So yeah, they're all about the same. Some of them are bigger than others. Like Great Detached Reef is, you know, like nearly 20 kilometers wide. The top of this one, very, very narrow. You know, it's only 50 meters wide. But it's interesting when you go back to the old nautical charts from the 1800s, you could see where they were using lead lines, you know, basically a piece of lead on a string. And they would have been old sailing ships, and they were dropping the lead lines down, and they mark where it is. And then they said, you know, no depth detected. And then they'd sail a few kilometers long and drop it and go, no depth detected. And they dropped these lead lines either side of Falkor Reef, completely missed it. But it needed multi-beam sonar. It needed this full 100% mapping sonar technology to reveal it. So, You know, for me, it was the biggest discovery in that entire year.
Just going back to the geology side, I mean, I've watched the video, and some of them are a couple of hours long, but considering we've had glacial and interglacial periods where the sea level has risen and falling, you know, 100 odd meters over time, are those events visible, scarred on something like the new reef, where you can see, say, when the indigenous people came here 70,000 years ago and the sea level was a lot lower, can you actually sort of get an idea of those lines, you know, when the sea was at that level and eroding it?
Absolutely, Bill. You know, you're a marine geologist. This is exactly how we think. We wanted to find evidence that you could see these sea level lows, what we call low stand. And the last low stand was the Ice Age, which is about 20,000 years ago. And globally, you know, the Ice Age, you know, the whole of Northern Hemisphere was locked up in ice, and the sea level had dropped about 100 meters. So you're spot on with your facts there. And so with the Great Barrier Reef, even though it had grown and that sea had dropping, exposed all of those coral reefs as limestone hills. And so during this period where certainly Aboriginals were on the Australian continent through that period, they would have been walking across the Great Barrier Reef during the Ice Age, looking up at flat limestone hills with kangaroos bouncing off around them and gum trees and marshes, you know, and hunting on the creeks that wove their way across the landscape. But the edge of the Great Barrier Reef is quite sharp. And what we wanted to see was there evidence of where the sea had sat there at the Ice Age and just eroding like a wave-cut cliff that you see, you know, like down places like Sydney and places like that, where you've got big sandstone cliffs and you see where the rock is actually eroded from waves. And that's what we did find. So we could see not, you know, huge indented caves, but certainly we could see where the cliff was, the edge of the Great Barrier Reef, this is now all underwater, of course, was sheer in most places. And then around that 100 to 120 meters was a definite overhang. And it was quite interesting because there's a lot of marine life in there. Because it's a little bit darker, the sorts of marine life in there, there's stylastrid hydrocorals. So it's, you know, just sort of hiding in that gloom. So there's quite a lot of marine life in these, in this overhang, and it was consistent. Like over hundreds of kilometers that we explored and mapped, that overhang is consistent, and so it is clear evidence where the sea was during the last Ice Age.
I think that's one of the interesting things about the Great Barrier Reef. We've had about 11 glacial and interglacial cycles in the last 2 million years. So the current Great Barrier Reef we've got is probably the 7th or 8th barrier reef we've had, although we've never been here, of course. But it basically, when we go into these interglacial periods, it is exposed, and they would lose all that life off them, and they just become the sort of limestone rocks and that. And then when we go back to an interglacial period and the sea level rises, it starts off from scratch again. So I find that amazing that it can go through this, turn into a desert, and then say 70,000 years later, the water tops up again, and life starts over.
Isn't it remarkable? And it's exactly right. And we know this from all sorts of evidence now, but one of probably the best is around Ribbon Reef 5, which is just offshore of Cooktown. Back in the 90s, they put a very long core. They basically drilled into the reef and went down. It's a scientific drilling program, and they went down several hundred meters. So they went through each one of these different layers. And what they found was that when the sea level comes up during these warm periods, you know, an interglacial. So when the sea level comes up, coral larvae populate whatever the bumps are on the ground and start growing, and you get a bit of coral growth. And then when you have about 100,000 years later, the sea level drops, it becomes high and dry, it's fully exposed. And we know that because there's soil. They actually get soil. Now, you only get soil from iron oxide, right? It has to be exposed to air. So you get soil layers, right? You know that it was just high and dry. And then the sea level rises about 100,000 years later. Coral larvae populate the rock again and grow, and you get another 10 or 20 meters of coral growth, and then it drops again. And over time, that coral just keeps building and building. So it dies, then builds, dies, then builds. And so you end up with this sort of almost like a tree ring story that you can look back through time, because you can
Vertical
date.
one.
Exactly, a vertical one. And when you look at the coral cores, they are like tree rings, except it's rock. And you can even see the species of the different corals that come in, the first colonizers, and then they get more established. And then as the sea level drops, the corals change, you know, they start getting a bit stressed and they become algae, and then suddenly you're back into soil. And so there are these regular cycles, and at least 6 to 8 different cycles through every one of these coral reefs. So, you know, we're getting a better handle on, I guess, how the Great Barrier Reef developed. And as a marine geologist, we're trying to tease that story out. And I guess going and mapping offshore, it was that story that we really didn't know about. You know, what's the edge of the Great Barrier Reef look like? Those canyons are remarkable. I mean, they're, you know, you can see them in Google Earth pictures because, you know, we've put the 3D stuff in there, but they now, you know, these are huge features. The canyons, you know, drop 2 to 3 kilometers in height, and, you know, they've eroded, you know, several, you know, 100 meters into the continental slope. So, you know, it's just this remarkable landscape that we have on our doorstep, literally from where I am now, probably only 50 kilometers away, that we didn't even know about maybe 10, 15 years ago.
Just in regards to that, I was just thinking there, I mean, you know, how we've had stories about people selling lots on the moon, you know, to buy a moonlight. Maybe we could go out and we could sort of buy beachfronts for the next interglacial period, and we'll have a beachfront property 70 miles currently at sea.
Yeah, well, you'll have to wait a while, probably about 100,000 years on the current cycle. Until then, we've, you know, like, you know, I don't want to go on about climate change, but sea levels are rising around where I am in Cairns, probably around about 4 millimeters a year. And as you get further north, you know, the rates are getting higher. So this is, you know, it's tuned in. I don't think we're going to be going down, but if it did, and you and I were around, Bill, yes, there'd be a lot of land exposed.
Oh, we'll never be. We'd have to live a long time. But just in regards to that, I mean, glacial and interglacial cycles. I mean, glacial cycles are currently running at about 70,000 years in duration from the ice cores, and interglacial periods are running around about the 20 to 25,000 years. So I think we're about 12.5 to nearly 17,000 into this. So we've got a few generations enjoying this nice warm period anyway.
Yeah, that's right. So we're in what's called the interglacial period, and it's the geological term for it is the Holocene, which started around about 10,000 years ago. And, you know, sea levels have been kind of topped up pretty high because, you know, the northern hemisphere ice sheets melted at the end of the ice age, and so, you know, we're in this sort of warming environment. I guess it, you know, begs the question, you know, what will be the state of this Falkor Reef in years to come? What I can say, another question was, you know, because, you know, we've just come out of in 2020, we just had another big bleaching event. You know, it was a global bleaching event. It was the third one after 2016. So, you know, we were curious, was there any evidence of bleaching or dead coral on the top of this Falkor Reef? And we could see no evidence of that. It looked like a thriving, healthy coral reef, even though on the Great Barrier Reef, on the shallow shelf, which is only about 6 kilometers further west, there were, the reefs had really suffered through that bleaching event. But I guess, again, the Falkor Reef is special. It's been there all this time. It's survived, irrespective of humans didn't even know it was there, but it's always been there.
We have to count it as pristine.
I think so.
I suppose the other thing is the big advantage it's had constantly 40 odd meters of water over the top of it, and I suppose out there the currents would be fairly significant, so the changeover of water coming down and cycling across would sort of help it out as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of energy out there, and I think again this comes back to why these reefs are unique, and maybe why they've managed to keep growing, is because they've got this continual high energy, clean water coming in from the coral sea, and all the marine life is easy. It's easy to access these reefs. So during those really big warming events, we know that places like Rain Island did quite well, just because they're a little bit isolated, a little bit further offshore, and I guess the water temperature, there's more mixing going on to take away that hot zone that was in the surface temperatures during a bleaching event. So look, the future of Falkor Reef, I hope, has a long future, much, long after we've gone. It's still growing. I just hope that's its future.
Okay, then look, we've gone well and truly over the hour. I hope you enjoyed tonight. I've certainly enjoyed it, and I hope our audience has too. So if you can just stay on the line, we'll have a little chat later, but I'll just sign off and introduce next week's episode. Thanks very much. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share, and subscribe to our Facebook page, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week, we'll be having another interesting guest, Rolf Champion. He'll be talking on about the psychology of changing people's position on various issues that we're faced with today. So join me again next week. Thank you.